going? Things are fine here. We stream tabletop RPGs, so obviously you know that there have been no technical difficulties whatsoever. But thank you so much for being here. I hope you're all excited to listen to three white men talk about tabletop role-playing games for an hour, because we are. Welcome. So this is So You Want to Be a Game Master, and we are a charity tabletop streaming channel on Twitch called Live from the Apocalypse. Basically, we attempt to basically, we don't want to give Amazon money. So we try to encourage people who check out our streams to donate to one of the charitable causes, organizations, nonprofits that we're platforming at that point instead of donating through Twitch. Yeah, we're attempting to live stream this today. Is that everything? We're good? We're just going to talk about like starting to run tabletop role-playing games. We have been doing this collectively for not very long, but separately for a very long time. Personally, I guess we'll go right into the introductions. My name is Will, by the way. I don't think I said that. I've been doing this for I've been running tabletop games for about 20 years. I started playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons with my dad when I was about 12. Nice. And pretty much just never stopped since then. I've played a lot of other systems since then. Haven't actually played much 5e, but cannot begin to catalog the systems that I have done games with. And then we started up Live from the Apocalypse in the midst of the pandemic because, like a lot of people, we were mostly maintaining our sanity through this. And we decided we wanted to try to do some good while we were doing it. So with that said, I'm going to stop talking. Andy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, more than happy to. All right, next slide, please, as we go through, right?
Well, no, we're
intros. Oh, just full intros? Okay, yeah, very cool. So yeah, I'm Andy, Andrew. I'm one of the GMs for Live from the Apocalypse. I've been gaming for about 25 years. I play and run all sorts of tabletop stuff, and I'm just always inspired to bring new people into the community and just watch it grow, because it's something it's had a great impact on my life for a very long time, and I just like kind of spreading the joy, right? So this is an opportunity to do that, and I'm very happy about it. So thank you all for being here.
Brendan?
I guess that's me then. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect, thank you. So my name is Brendan. I also have been running tabletop games since, the year 2000. Yeah. Got into Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, second edition back in the day. Played a couple games with my dad as the DM, and then he, was an adult with responsibilities and couldn't do it anymore. I'm sure nobody here knows what that is like. And so I kind of had to be if I wanted my friends to play with me. So I learned on the fly. And now 20 years later, we're here. I kind of got slowly dragged into the inertia of Live from the Apocalypse, like a terrible sinkhole or a quasar.
You're really selling this.
But no, I'm super happy to be here, and thank you guys so much for coming out to listen to us. I guess I will preface this whole thing with there's gonna be a lot of just like personal opinion and experience here. Mm-hmm. So it is informed by experience, but also don't listen to us.
Unless you want to. But if you don't want to, yeah, don't fucking listen to us.
If you want to, maybe, I guess.
Cool.
All right, well, I guess the first step in getting started is getting started.
Yeah.
Which one of us is that?
That's an A.
Oh, I'm stoked for this one. So I jumped the gun earlier when I was like, next slide, let's go. But now for real this time.
Andy's very high energy. He's very sad he couldn't stay.
I was about to like jump into the audience and come talk to you, but I'm keeping it restrained. So, a couple things. One, thank you, Brendan, for putting this panel together. This is awesome. We're here because you did the work, and that rocks. Two, Will, thank you for putting the channel together as a way for us to have this outlet. During the last 9 months, we've gone from just gaming online a bit to like now we're doing panels at MAGFest. Cool. And then three, thank all of you for just, again, coming to the panel and having an interest, because the community needs people who want to tell stories, and it's rewarding. It's difficult, but it's rewarding, right? And so whether you've never run a game before or you're just looking for more tips and tricks, whatever the case may be, first step is just showing up and talking to people. So that rocks. Thank you. You're awesome. So I'm going to talk about 3 things because running games is hard. And I'm going to give you a bunch of methodologies to help narrow focus and make life easier on you when you're starting. Because there's always the possibilities of just endless options, right? And that can be overwhelming at times. So this is a way to kind of just narrow that focus and make prep a lot easier so you can get started, right? The 3 ways you're going to do that: session zeros and expectation management, focusing on your preparation and keeping the session rolling, and then using player feedback to improve your focus, okay? And just get better. So what does that mean? So session zeros, right? Expectation management. For those of you who don't know, a session 0 is where you sit down with your players ahead of time before you actually start the campaign and just go over all the stuff you want to do. You talk about theme, you talk about tone, role-playing, your combat versus role-play balance, right? What you want out of the game and what the players want out of the game, right? So when you have that conversation, it's very important because it's going to help answer a lot of questions right off the bat and make it so you don't have to guess at what you're doing. You already know where to start prepping and going, right? And your players also know. So when you say, I want to run a high pulp action pirate adventure, right? Let's go goofy pirates. They know it's very different than violent pirates, right? Very different than serious pirates like Master and Commander, you know, pirate, privateer, ships on the high seas. You get the point, right? It paints a very different image in their minds. So they know what they're getting into and can build a character tailored into your world and story with, of course, their feedback affecting your prep. It's also important to have conversations about topics that could be off limits, right? Have a kind of consent conversation. If you're running something like investigative horror, where I run a lot of Call of Cthulhu, it can get very dark. If people are on board with that, awesome, but have that conversation ahead of time. Don't spring that on people. There's a lot of different ways to do that. If you hit us up in the Discord, we have consent forms and like a lot of different ways you can talk through that, but just have that conversation in some meaningful way ahead of time. Okay, it'll save you a lot of pain and heartache, and it also make your players more comfortable at the table, which is great, right?
And I'll jump in here. We talk about those sort of like a kind of calibration and consent mechanics a bit. A lot in terms of like horror, but and we say that because frankly we're all kind of horror nerds here. We do a lot of that. Me personally, it inevitably leaks in whatever genre I'm running. You could ask me to run a My Little Pony game, and I would find a way to make it spoopy. But even outside of horror, even if you have no interest at all in running something like horror adjacent, frankly, those kinds of conversations are invaluable. And part of it is because then once everybody is comfortable, everybody has a good sense of what the boundaries are, and everyone has trust that those boundaries will not be crossed, then you can go to some cool places together in role play. It can be freeing to know you have this is the space that you can play in, and you can play in that space as much as you want without having to worry about whether you're going to cross a line or someone is going to cross a line with you.
Absolutely. We have a Session 0 Safety Tips podcast episode. It was an hour long, and then we are making a part 2 because we got way into detail about that stuff. So there's a lot, and it's all very good, but get used to doing it and just having those conversations and being open about it. It's a great tool. Please use it.
It also just shows that you care. Like, even if nothing comes up from it, it's just a nice way to indicate, like, hey, we do things a little differently around here.
Absolutely. So the last thing is in your Session 0, you have a chance to sit down, talk about that theme, role play, combat, all those things you expect, and then you sit there and make characters with your friends, right? I've seen a lot of people go, I want to run a game, then people just show up day of, they brought a whole bunch of different characters, and like the personalities and the tone don't match, right? They're all over the place, and it's stressful for the players, it's really stressful for the storyteller who's trying to like make this grab bag of chaos characters work together. And that can be a lot of fun, but if that's not what you planned, like that is hard. So sit down with your players and just talk through the characters they want to make, and then make sure that they're ready to engage your plot and your world. They come with their own motivations, and then you can engage them as you tell the story. All that's going to go into the second part, which is your focus on your prep, right? Because now you have 90% of the work done. You know the world, you know the theme, you know the tone, you know what you're going to focus on, and you know the different characters in this world that you're going to have to engage in some way. So that has taken the endless spectrum of possibilities and narrowed that dramatically, right? Now, stuff's going to come up that you don't know, sure, but way less things to focus on, right? And that's the second thing is like when you prep, you don't need to know everything. People have this expectation that as a storyteller, you have all the answers all the time, and at least you should, right? But the truth is, if you do that to yourself, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. So that prep's going to help you establish all of that. And there are tools when you're running the game itself that are going to help you make things work better, right? Those are good words. So if you get to a point where you don't know a rule, that's fine. Just tell people, hey, I need 10 minutes. Let's take a break. You know what? Who wants to order a pizza? So, who wants to go on a beer run? I had to look it up, right? That's an option. You can get to the point where you can make a call on the fly, let's say. There's a lot of dramatic tension in a moment, right? And you want to really maintain the tension. Maybe taking a break is not the right vibe. You can turn to the player in the scene and say, hey, are you good with us resolving this way? We can go back later and check it, but like, let's just make this roll now. And if they're good with it, make the roll and keep going, all right? Because it keeps the action and tension high, right? The other thing, though, is Brendan's going to talk about a lot of different resources that exist, but remember your players are resources too, right? And I mean this as it's a collaborative thing, so give them work at the table, right? Not like work to show up and actually play the game, but hey, like, okay, hey, you're my assistant GM, please. I know we're about to get into a scene where like it's gonna be high grapple mechanics, and I can't remember any of that stuff. Hey, can you pull that up for me real quick? Thank you. Run this scene. Now those things are prepped, okay? Hey, please make sure, you're the scheduler, just please make sure before we leave here, we schedule something, right? Help me help you, because that alleviates pressure from you and makes it easier and makes the players more engaged in everything, and that's amazing, right? And lastly, it's collaborative, right? So if you get to a point where you're not sure how to resolve something, it doesn't all have to be on you. You can look at a player and go, what do you think should happen here? What are you trying to do? You keep asking me what the tallest building in the city is, and that's not something I planned. What are you looking for? Oh, I'm looking for an Assassin's Creed style observation post so I can see the British Royal Navy coming into port following us from our last treasure heist. Cool, easy. Like,
So specific.
yeah, but that's the thing. That's what the player wants. I don't have to guess that because I never would. I'd be like, I don't know, it's a church, maybe. Like, I would go just down a crazy random path, trying to give them something when I could just ask them, hey, what are you looking for? And they'll tell you, right? So that's in the session. And the last thing is at the end, right? You want to learn from your player feedback. And this is important. A lot of people go, oh, that was a good session. Bye. All right. Did you have fun? Yeah, we had fun. See ya. And then you just left there with your own thoughts going, did that actually work? Was that cool? I don't know. So if you have the time afterwards, my buddy introduced this, and I love it so much. We do a thing called favorites, right? And you just kind of make it evolve. So with favorites, people throughout the session write down cool stuff they liked that other players did, that you as the storyteller did. Just kind of make a few notes. And then afterwards, kind of do a highlights reel of like, oh yeah, it was hilarious when you came up with this and you did that and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a great way to bond and talk about the game itself. It's also a great way for you to admit at times, like, man, I didn't have an answer for that, but like, I'm really glad you gave me that idea because that inspired me to go this way. And the player's like, wow, my input matters and the collaboration works because they can see the thought process, because sometimes they don't. It's also important because if they have legitimate feedback, right, you can do it at that point. So it's not just someone coming up to you and being like, hey man, that combat kind of sucked. It's layered in there with all the good stuff. Hey, the pacing was great, this was great. Look, the magic mechanic in that fight, that was brutal. It was hard to grasp. I lost the thread multiple times. Can we find a way to clean that up? I had a lot of fun, I liked the concept, but just in action, it didn't work for me. Yeah, cool, absolutely. And then take that feedback and apply it.
I'm gonna jump in. We talk a lot about the Matt Mercer effect. The popularization of D&D and tabletop role-playing games in general is great because more people are getting into it and trying it out, but it also sets this incredibly unreasonable bar for standards that people have. Like when we all started playing D&D back then, there was nobody to compare yourself to. Like if you were doing it, you were probably the only person around you doing it. And it didn't matter if you were good or not because people who wanted to play didn't have a choice. But now, like, there's all these different media. There's, Brendan Lee Mulligan, Matt Mercer, all these other DMs who do it professionally, and on top of that are not just DMs, they're performers. They're voice actors or improvisers or comedians, and that brings a whole other skill set to the table that you should not feel pressured to apply to yourself. It's a standard that you cannot possibly hold yourself to without years and years and years of experience and practice. So basically just don't try to be Matt Mercer, just be you, and
Absolutely.
people will have fun.
That's really the big thing is, for the conclusion of my piece, the goal is to have fun, right? You are a player at the table as well. Your enjoyment matters. If you are crushed under the weight of stress and anxiety and pressure to try to perform at a level that you think you need to be at, because let's be honest, I know in my opinion, my harshest critic is me. I always want to do more and be better. And sometimes people will just tell you, no, that was awesome. And if they give you feedback, cool, it's an easy tweak. But those are just tools and concepts that are helpful when you run a game. Because I'm not going to sit here and talk about all the stuff that's in the player's handbook or the DMG. Like, you guys can read that kind of stuff, right? These are just lessons learned from me as I've gone through this and, like, crashed and burned, stressed myself out, flipped out, canceled sessions. Like, learn from pain. Hopefully it's better when other people share the experience. That way you don't have to make the same mistakes. So those are things that will hopefully make life a lot easier going in. So in summary, basically, manage the expectations in your session 0. Right? Have those conversations, communicate. Right? It's going to help you focus your session prep so that it closes that window of potential outcomes so you can just focus on what you need to know and figure out the rest later. It's probably cool to know the entire divine structure. You may not need it for the session. Don't worry about it. All right? And lastly, listen to your players, have that feedback, and have a good time. Okay? So with that, that's all I got.
All right.
Thank you very much for that.
I was going to say, of course, we're giving you this advice, particularly listening to Andy talk about, not stress yourself out too much, and talking about sort of like holding yourself to an unreasonably high standard, like Will was. We're giving you this advice, but at the same time, I think it would be useful for us to acknowledge that we also, all three of us here, can be very high anxiety perfectionists. So, the impulse is definitely there. And I would say to not beat yourself up if you catch yourself stressing about it. Being a GM can be very stressful. So I would say probably better would be just to say to be kind to yourself, especially
Absolutely.
as you are just starting out. And I guess that tip, since Andy's concluded, that moves me on to talked about some ways of going about it. What are some actual tools that you can use to help while you are getting started? Pictured here is everything that I personally use to run a session of game. Let me consult my notes here.
You guys took notes?
Yeah, actually, and so that is actually a very good thing to start off on. Probably one of the best things you can possibly do as a game master is to keep notes. They don't have to be super detailed. You don't have to write out every stat block for every monster or every single line of dialogue for an NPC, but something to organize your thoughts. I can be very bad about that. I like to keep everything up in here because sometimes it's hard for me to articulate the nuances of a particular thought on paper. But my brain is also bad and lies to me. So really, again, and you can use, I know there's there's an entire cottage industry at this point of tools being marketed to would-be game masters. If anyone has spent 5 seconds on RPG YouTube, you've seen someone shilling for World Anvil. And I've used World Anvil a bit. I think it does have a lot of very cool tools for organizing all of your thoughts and keeping everything in your setting and your game and your character sheets all together. But I also want to say you don't need that. It's more important just to have some kind of notes, some kind of system of organization, more so than it is important to have the coolest and best toy that has all of the bells and whistles and all the tailor-made features. And then more specifically, it was going to talk about platforms for playing the game. This is frankly something that has become much bigger part of the conversation than it has really at any point previously. Traditionally, you could argue that tabletop role-playing games are played as at a table with a group of people. And I am a big fan of that. I love in-person games. It's how I came up, and I think there's no substitute for it. At the same time, we are all here right now in the time that we are living in. So, frankly, better chance than not that you're going to be running your games in a virtual context. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing that. There are, likewise, an entire cottage industry of platforms you could use that offer various features. Roll20, probably the largest and most popular. Likewise, Fantasy Grounds, Astral, that all have things and ways to like keep your character sheets there, roll all of your dice in the chat. You can put up pictures, maps, tokens, that sort of thing. At the same time, kind of like I was saying earlier, if all that seems like a lot, if all that seems like a really steep learning curve, you don't necessarily have to do that. At the end of the day, all you really need for most tabletop games that you're going to run with your friends is some kind of video chat. Oh, you got a disagreement over here?
No, Andy didn't silence his phone.
Oh, I see.
It's fine.
Yeah, feel free to jump in, guys, if you have a different opinion on it.
No, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. If it feels daunting trying to get into like Roll20 or Astral or any of those, it's because it is.
Yeah.
They're hard.
Yeah,
They're very complicated.
Total honesty, I actually mostly don't use them. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that personally, my tastes as a game master, I mostly don't use them. You mostly just need a video chat that you can use. You know, it can be cool to have something like paid Zoom where you can have like breakout rooms and stuff like that. But even that, not really necessary. Just a place for you to come together and to all be in the same room and talk it out. Now, in the case where you may feel like you need something more visual, like D&D 5e is, you know, and we're going to talk about that a lot in part just because it is by far the largest and most popular franchise. You know, it's the household name. You know, you tell your friends you're getting into role-playing games, and they say what, and you say, oh, like D&D. So D&D 5e is very, very visual. It kind of assumes you're going to have a map. You can absolutely do it in a theater of the mind style. That is kind of my preference as well, starting way back in 2nd edition. But it is often easier if you have a map, a grid map, and tokens that you can use. You can actually very easily do those same sorts of things just with a shared Google document. Just go, do you have a Gmail account? Google Drive. Have a shared Google document. You can drop in a map. You can drop in paste some tokens in there that you can move around. Give your friends permission to edit it, and boom, you're in business. That's it right there. I'm not saying that is superior to the various products and platforms that are out there right now.
Not saying it's not.
But it's mostly what I use because it's what I started using before most of those platforms existed, and in a lot of cases, I think it works just as well. So, and again, I say that just you don't feel like you have to learn the ins and outs of all of the features of these various platforms that are saying that they are the place where you play online role-playing games.
Some of them are also like really resource intensive. And if some of your players don't have like really good computers or laptops, they will crash. Like Roll20 will crash your friends' computers.
Now, that all being said, so I feel like I've just been maybe even needlessly negative about a lot of these products right now. I can be very opinionated. I will also plug some ones that I do like. Incarnate. Incarnate is a paid subscription, but it's pretty small. I think it's only like $5 a month. And even then, you can basically pay $5, get in there, make some maps, and get out, basically. And it does have a lot of very cool map making tools. If you want a bespoke map, like something that doesn't already exist, you can't find already existing on the internet, Incarnate is actually very fun. I've really enjoyed using it personally to make custom maps and things like that.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to jump in real quick. So, it all comes down to stylistic intent, right? So if you really want to use these platforms, like I love Foundry and D&D Beyond, right? But I had to take a long time to watch YouTube videos and like talk to other people and go, how do you work? And at times they work great. Sometimes I don't need them. So just do what works best for you. If other people are insisting on something like that and you don't want to do it, that's cool. Or you can say, cool, if you want to use this platform, you know how to use it, walk me through it, man. Like, we'll figure it out together. Or just say, no, I'm doing Theater of the Mind this time, we'll try that next time, right? Dealer's choice.
I want to shout out a lesser known program called Owlbear Rodeo.
That's a good one.
Which is basically like Roll20, but without the stuff that crashes your friends' computers. So it doesn't have voice, it doesn't have video. It's basically just the map making tools, the tokens, the layering, all of that stuff. It's great. I would highly recommend it.
Oh, very cool. I've heard of it, I just haven't used it
Yeah,
yet. So,
it's very good.
All right, very cool. In terms of resources, there is also the classic tome of eldritch knowledge, what we used to call books.
Books.
Like I said, back in my day, you basically just had like the Dungeon Master's Guide and maybe some GeoCities sites with like 2-frame GIFs and a guest book. And I do think actually that the Dungeon Master's Guide does actually have a lot of good advice in it, even if it is maybe not always the best organized. I would say rather than trying to read it cover to cover, think of the question that you want to ask and then try to look through. They figure out, it's like, okay, I want to figure out how I want to build this village. I want to know how I want to make these NPCs. I want to know how I should just run an encounter so that there is dramatic tension, and then try to look for the answer to that specific question. Likewise, there are a lot of resources on YouTube that you can use. You can be specific and find the listicle of your choice that will answer your question. Personally, even though I have been doing this for as long as I have, I still like to take advantage of a lot of these resources because, in my opinion, you're as soon as you stop growing, you start stagnating. So always need to be looking for new perspectives and new takes on things. I have watched a lot of, if I'm pronouncing this right, Ginny D on YouTube.
Yes.
I've watched a lot of WebDM. In terms of podcasts, again, if you're into more of the kind of the horror side of things, doing a lot of Call of Cthulhu, Onyx Path, White Wolf Systems, Warhammer, Darker Days Radio is a good podcast with a lot that talks a lot about setting, systems, tone, mood, those sorts of things. But back on...
Oh, can I shout somebody out?
I suppose.
Okay, cool. There's a really good YouTube channel called the Dungeon Noobs Guide. It's run by this guy named Klaus. He's great, and he takes you through role-playing game systems. He talks about the rules, and then they actually play a game of it. So not only do you get the rules, but then you get to see it in action for a session.
Nice.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Nice. And actually, kind of a nice segue into me that sort of back on books is honestly, so D&D breaks their Game Master resources into its own entirely separate supplement. Most other game systems don't actually do that. Most game systems will put everything into one book. And so if you're trying to learn a new system, frequently they will have a section in the back somewhere that has advice for new GMs. And honestly, I have found, even excluding those sections, I find just taking the time to sit and read through a new system will both give me inspiration in terms of the kind of story that I want to tell. I will immediately ping on things, say, oh, that sounds like it would be an interesting hook to start a story around. And then, as I am reading through the rules, the interactions will start to sort of become clear to me through demonstration. Though that's also partially kind of more how I learn is through sort of observation in that way. So I would say even read other systems, read other settings, other systems you haven't done before. Read Savage Worlds, Powered by the Apocalypse, Fate. Will loves to plug Fate.
Fate plug.
Read one-page RPGs. A lot of them are available for free on itch.io. And they will have like novel approaches to mechanics that you might think, oh, instead of running it the way that we're running this in the book, this particular thing, what if we ran it this way? Mm-hmm. You're the game master. No one can stop you.
Literally, no one can stop you.
And actually, I guess that feels like a solid segue into the next section.
Sure, let's do it. So this is, I'll be talking about this.
So pictured here, once again, game master preparing an hour before the session, oil on canvas, 1899.
Yeah. So when it comes to creating your game, there's a lot of different words that you'll probably hear or have heard thrown around: world building, character creation, things like that. If you're starting from scratch, you may not really be clear about what those are. So I'll breeze through those real quick. But basically, like, world building is the setting that your game is going to take place in. You can create a wholly unique one, or you can run something from a module, which, like, D&D publishes plenty of those. They're the full adventure paths. You start at like level 1 usually, sometimes higher levels, and then it tells you what level you should end up at by the end. Those are great, and I would highly recommend them. I've had a lot of fun running those in the past. Again, don't feel like you're a bad GM if you're not creating, a 300-page reference document for your unique fantasy setting.
I love Brandon Sanderson.
But there are plenty of opportunities also to like make those unique and make them your own. Don't feel like you have to stick exactly to the letter of those if you go that way. When it comes to world building, I think this is kind of in contrast to some of the other GMs, but when I start thinking about world building for a game, I will do maybe 20% of it on my own. And then the other 80% I will normally do after we do character creation. Because I'll start with a framework, I'll start with covering the tone and the sorts of topics and themes that we want to cover. Like Andy was saying earlier, session 0 stuff. And then once the characters have been made, once I know what people are playing, once I have heard their backstories and things like that, then I'll start to build out the rest of the world and incorporate those elements as much as I possibly can, because if your character is involved in the world in a major way, it's going to make it more engaging and more fun for you. So don't feel like you have to start with that. Fate has a really good basis. Fate is just another role-playing system, but it's one that's very narratively driven. And sort of rules light in contrast to D&D. There are crunchier systems, there are less crunchy systems.
Do you want to define a little bit crunch?
No. Crunch it basically refers to how many rules you have to learn to play the game well. So a really crunchy game, the best example would probably be Pathfinder or 3.5 D&D, where you're flipping through 5 different sections of the book just to figure out how to resolve one round of combat. And then, like, on the other end of the spectrum, you probably have Powered by the Apocalypse, where basically you're just making everything up as you go. And you never have to look at anything, really. Fate is somewhere in the middle, I would say, but it has a very good mechanic for connecting different characters to one another. And that's also really valuable, giving the characters reasons to care about each other, giving them a reason why they are together, why they know each other, any shared history that they have. In terms of building out your world, I would really recommend, there are a lot of different systems and resources that are just for that. The number one that I would probably recommend is called Microscope. I really love using Microscope. It's a very short book. It's kind of a game in and of itself, but I tend to use it more as a tool. The concept of Microscope is that you start with the general of your setting, and then you narrow it down collectively with your players. So you say, hey, we're going to play in like a world where World War II never happened. And that's where you start, just super broad. And then you narrow it down to say, all right, cool, what are the pivotal points that separate that world from our world? And then you zoom in on those pivotal points and you say, all right, who was in the room when those points were happening? And then everybody picks a character in that room, and then you just play it out. There are no rules. You just talk. If it comes to something that would normally need to be resolved with rolling, you just talk it out. You figure out what would happen. And because you're playing so many different characters, and they're not ones that you've like spent a lot of time with and put down on paper and defined their abilities, I find that people are less attached to them. So it's a lot easier to talk through combat instead of, you have a lot less of people being like, well, but actually, I think my guy's really good at punching, and he's gonna punch you. And you can't do anything about it because he's really good at it.
So good.
He's so good. So Microscope is a really great one. I would really recommend that one. Year One is another system that has a really good world building aspect built into it. You can sort of pick and choose these things from other systems to get yours to a point where you like to be, and then all of your players have a lot of buy-in at that point, and are invested in the world itself.
Do you mind if I plug a couple others?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so yeah, Will's talking about like Year One and Microscope, some others that I've discovered lately that are quite good. And now, so they're almost kind of like what we call micro games. They're like pamphlet sized, and they're almost like a collaborative game in themselves that you can play in the span of 2-3 hours. I admittedly got into them just because I love world building. Will was saying, he likes to world build and then let the players fill in the gaps. That's fairly new to me. I have settings upon settings upon settings taking up entirely too much real estate in my brain. So I like games like these, but they're also very, very fun for if you want to get your players involved and get everyone excited about the setting that you're going to be playing in. Some other ones besides Year One and Microscope that I like a lot. One is Downfall, where you all collectively make the setting, build up this house of cards, and then you blow it up. All of you together decide how this world falls apart. And frequently, and it can be kind of an intense game, but also what you have at the end is this broken world that is rife with opportunities for drama, for conflict, for things for your characters to do and get involved with. Another one I think that's gotten some traction recently is called The Quiet Year. They used that in the most recent season of The Adventure Zone, where you all get together and you basically describe a year in the life of this post-apocalyptic civilization. And even though the game ends at a certain point, there's nothing saying that you can't then take this post-apocalyptic settlement that you have collectively created and then use that as the jumping off point for your longer term, more involved role-playing game.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you a really great jumping off point. And I find it's hard for me to like focus too much on one particular setting or aspect of the setting, but once I have built it out in a way that involves the other characters, I usually find that I can't stop thinking about it. And then it just sort of naturally snowballs from there. Other people are going to bring other things to the table, other experiences, other points of view, other things that you haven't considered, which is one of the reasons why I like diversity and inclusivity in the hobby is so important. That's a whole other panel. We're not going to get into that. But just inviting those other perspectives and point of views into your world building is so valuable, and I really can't overstate how important that is.
Can I throw one thing out there?
Yeah.
So, on tools for good collaboration world building, Powered by the Apocalypse, all the different genres in there, like Apocalypse World, Monster of the Week, Urban Shadows, right? All have some sort of cool mechanic that builds parties, and they're all different enough, right? They're simple. I think Apocalypse World has like shared history. Urban Shadows has like debts owed and received from other players. Epilion, the Baby Dragons game, has like the things you value and why that's like powerful to you and how you how other people understand how to tap those inspiration things within you, right? Because friendship is magic and all that stuff in that game, and it's very good. The point is you can take all those, blend them together, and those are just very simple, easy ways to find quick mechanics to bond your table in Session Zero. And they're very rules light, so you don't have to just do a bunch of digging to figure them all out. They're quite straightforward.
Yeah. So moving on from world building just a little bit and into the vast pitfall topic of creating interesting NPCs. That's super hard, shockingly. Really hard to come up with just an entire world of interesting and unique people that like engage the players and have cool backstories and things like that. Number one thing I'm going to shout out here, random generators. The DMG is full of them. A lot of systems are full of them. There are a million websites out there that will do it, and there is absolutely no shame in using them as a jumping off point. I do it probably most of the time. It gives you like a very basic framework, and you just kind of keep generating options until something catches your eye. And then you can build on it if you want to, or just go with it. It doesn't matter. What's going to matter is the interactions that they have with the NPC in that moment. And having anything prepared, in my experience, is better than just sort of being like, the bartender? Jeff. Is Jeff the bartender?
He's got a name.
Yeah.
Damn.
His name is Jeff.
Awesome.
They're all named Jeff. But
Kind of a Nurse Joy situation.
yeah, very Nurse Joy situation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The Dungeon Master's Guide does have good opportunities for that. We have another podcast episode that's coming out at some point where we talk about creating interesting villains and things like that. Obviously, villains and like main NPCs are going to be a bigger topic. They're going to have more weight behind them than your average everyday NPC. But like Andy was saying earlier, when you stop and say, does anybody want to grab a beer? Like, I need to look up this rule or something like that. If they show up to a location that you did not plan for and you don't have NPCs prepared, don't be afraid to say, all right, we're taking a beer break, and just generate some randos. And you'll have something that's going to be more interesting than Jeff the bartender, I promise you. Or whatever you end up with.
Or a beverage of your choice drink.
Or a beverage of your choice. Yeah, you don't have to drink beer. Don't drink beer. Yeah. Maybe I should have taken notes.
If I may, so one last thing too for resources, right? I'll do a shameless plug for the channel, right?
Oh, yeah.
We have a Discord QR code up here, right? We're going to put our social media up at the end. But we are not the end-all, be-all of knowledge, but we have a ton of people in this community who are just awesome and have a lot of good thoughts and opinions. So if you want to jump into our Discord and talk with us and them, if you want to get on TTRPG Twitter and follow us there too. We talk to a whole bunch of creators, and they've all got awesome stuff and neat inspiration to check out. So just getting involved in the community and asking questions and surrounding yourself with people who have that creative boost is great. So that's an option as well, and a shameless plug.
Well, I think as long as we're asking for engagement from our lovely audience, that seems like as good of a segue as any.
Here to help.
Yeah, do some Q&A. Do we have any questions about anything we talked about today?
Oh, there's one.
Yeah.
So
the question was how we learn new systems and then like teach them to the players? Okay, cool.
That can be very tricky. That is actually something that I do a lot. I run programs. I run a lot of introductory D&D games. D&D 5e, even itself, like the household name, not the easiest system to learn, in my opinion, honestly. Even like as a first level character, there's a lot of plate spinning. So I would say if you are looking to try and teach someone a system, I would, and they're willing to do it, I would usually actually maybe suggest trying to go for a slightly more rules light system. Although, at the same time, it depends on what your players are looking for. We talked a bit earlier about crunchy versus less crunchy systems. People enjoy different things. People do like the game aspect of these things as well. So, teaching is usually what I will try to do is try to break it down into bite-sized chunks, or I will run a session that is more or less a teaching session, where I will sort of introduce the concept of role-playing and what you're going to be doing, and then we'll sort of try to structure encounters, so almost kind of like a video game tutorial, where, okay, you've encountered this situation, so now we're going to talk about some skill checks, what skills are, what they do, like what kind of things you have at your fingertips, you know, and then walk them through how to sort of adjudicate those, have a social encounter, and then when you get to combat, don't overburden them at the beginning talking about how combat's going to work, and now we're just going to go through step by step in the course of this session how combat works in a live fire environment, basically. You guys have any thoughts?
I mean, everybody has a different learning style. Different things are going to work well for different players. If you have a very dedicated group who really want to get into it, I think Brendan's way is great. If you are doing a one-shot, if you have some people who have expressed interest, but like they don't really want to, like, sometimes you have people who say, I want to play D&D, and then they don't know what they signed up for.
Homework the game.
Yeah, basically. So what I will usually try to do in those circumstances, no matter what the system is I will isolate the core mechanic. I will do like the board game thing, where I will isolate the core mechanic, I will explain that, and then I will say, and we'll figure out the rest as we go along. So like if I was pitching D&D 5e to somebody, I would say, well, basically when you want to do something, you roll a d20, you add some of your stuff to it, the higher you roll, the better you succeed. If it's not live from the apocalypse, that's us. If it's powered by the apocalypse, I would say something like, well, you roll 2d6, you add your stat to it, and the higher you roll, the better you succeed, and stuff like that. And it's cool that there are so many systems now that you can do that with, because when we had 3.5 D&D and Pathfinder, you couldn't do that. You would be like, yeah, you roll 1d20 and you add some stuff to it, but if you roll in the mid-range, then something else could happen. And also, if you're trying to do something to somebody else, you compare it to a different number, and high is not necessarily better. It was a whole thing. So,
And so something else also I will say, not all systems are as good at explaining themselves as others. So to use the 3-5 example, like 3-5 skills, don't recommend using it. Like, very straightforward. You have skill points. You get one rank in a skill for every one skill point you spend if it's a class skill. If it's not a class skill, you have to spend 2 skill points to get a rank. That's 2 sentences. The book devotes like a chapter to it and doesn't explain it. Conversely, when I first got into fudge and fate-based systems, I was really confused about how the dice system worked. You have the dice with these blanks and these pluses and minuses. And I was reading the books, reading the section of how to do it, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it, and it was frustrating me. Then someone literally just said, oh, you roll the dice, the pluses add, the minuses subtract, then you compare it to the score, and that's how well you did. And I'm like, oh, well, why didn't they just say that? So sometimes you also have to kind of figure out what the rules are trying to say.
So in terms of, that's a very good point too, in terms of teaching people new systems, right? One of the hardest things is trying to figure out the brevity piece, right? And how interested that person is. So once you figure that out, you can sit down and obviously you have a little homework on your end. You have to figure out the system so you can explain it to people. If you know people who are familiar with the system, tap into its resources, right? If you don't know, but you have a couple friends you play with, sit down one night, crack the book open, and just make it an absolute shit show of a learning experience, right? Make it fun, like enjoy it, but just go, we don't know what we're doing, we're gonna figure it out live, and you do that as like a little mini play test, right?
Yeah, if you discovered that, at the end, like, oh no, we didn't run that encounter at all the way it was supposed to be run, that's okay. Did everyone have fun?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Moving on.
Just tell people what's up. And the bottom line is, thought's gone. Anyway, be honest about it, right?
Sir,
yeah,
you had a question.
So, I'll use 5e as an example. A lot of systems have things like bond, fraud, ideals, and backstory. And a lot of times I just get using I would say alignment, just kind of brush to the side and say it's a little bit of icing for players to use. But as a DM, do you ever use those to kind of engage with players? What are some of the tips and tricks you have for really concluding that and making it a little more connected to players that way?
I personally, so the way that those are written out in like 5e and in some other systems do it differently, but in a lot of systems, you're right, it's just kind of like part of your character creation. I personally like to do those at the table, like with the players, and I like it to be a conversation. Like it's nice that in 5e they give you, I think it's a chart you can roll on. At the very least, you can like choose from those. But I personally just like to frame them as questions, and one of the best sessions I ever played in was run by one of the players that's on our channel. It was Dungeon World, and it has a similar mechanic to that. And what he did was he brought each of us into a room separately, because we could do that then, and asked us the questions. And then we had a conversation back and forth with like me in character and him as the DM. So there are ways to make those almost like micro games, like what Brendan was plugging earlier. And in that way, it tends to get people more involved, more invested, and more willing to explore those depths of their characters than saying like, I guess I was a street urchin. I stole money.
So one of my favorite,
the session 0, which you can make the card gen part of session 0, but I'm also a fan of having just a session that is devoted just to card gen, with everybody making their characters together at the same time. And that tends to make, I think, the best party dynamics. Even if you're not actively trying to encourage these ties between the characters and how they're connected to the world, a lot of times that'll just kind of happen. And then alignment is kind of its own separate can of worms. Just, you know, how D&D handles morality and trying to sort of ascribe an objective ethical construct onto a fairly subjective world. And likewise, alignment used to be more important in previous editions, but I think they got tired of all the arguments it caused. So it's kind of a vestigial edition in much of 5e.
Yeah, we call it a win that paladins don't have to be lawful good anymore, and we leave it at that.
Yeah. So one of the big things, if you're going through the character generation process and trying to get people to explore those ideals, bonds, flaws within their character, and you ask people, you know, like, okay, cool, you made this character, what's their deal? And they're like, I don't know. Cool. Hey, this is one I like to use. Walk me through a typical day of your character's life, right? When you wake up in the morning, first thing, describe where you live, right? And then they can just start thinking, well, you know, my character is like a real neat freak, so I think my room looks like this. I have these things around here. I'm like, cool. What do you do, right? What's the first thing you do when you wake up? Do you hit the snooze alarm, or do you go out for a cup of coffee, or do you start working out? Like, already you're starting to define characteristics now. You're just not asking them, hey, define the characteristics. It's like, okay, cool. Your character seems like a morning person who has a good routine. Okay, let's walk through the day. And then kind of just talk through that. And it's very, very easy as they kind of generate the things that they think would be interesting for that character to have. And then once they're done with, you know, okay, you go to work or you go, you know, back to bed at the end of the day, however you want to end it, then you can look at it and go, okay, cool. Here's the things that seem to matter to you. Here are the things you kind of struggle with. Like, oh, I'm always late to stuff. That sounds like a flaw. You know? Oh, it's really important that I be on time because I don't want to let my friends down. You know? Oh, okay, cool. That sounds like a bond or an ideal. Sorry, an ideal. Right? I kind of dissect it that way. Kind of inception the character creation piece.
I just want to mention, because I realize we've been talking a lot about these like made up back and forth scenarios that exist outside the framework of a lot of these games, and I realize that can be daunting and feel a little silly when you first get into it, and that's completely valid. We talk a lot in like tabletop spaces about yes and, the core rule of like improv and stuff like that. You're always supposed to yes and your partner, whatever they go off of. But what another player on our channel pointed out, that like sometimes just limiting that message to yes and can result in people ending up in some uncomfortable scenarios where one player is building to something and another player is not comfortable with it. But like that first player has the expectation that they're just going to go back and forth with them. So when we talk about yes and in tabletop spaces, I think it's really important to just add an addendum that like yes and as long as you are comfortable. And it's okay to offer prompts and build back and forth in a way that you're not constantly building to something. If one of your players is struggling, or if you're struggling, it's okay to like slow things down, offer suggestions, wait a while, or just like have a sub conversation back and forth about what it is that they're trying to describe. But like, yes and, sure, but with an asterisk.
The other side of yes and is no but.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, what was your question in the back?
Do you have any advice on handling character death?
Character death?
Mostly just handling expectations in the beginning.
Oh.
Hell yeah, we do.
You've hit on a topic that's so near and dear to my heart. I love your gloves, by the way.
Andrew, take it away.
So I run a lot of Call of Cthulhu. I've killed a lot of characters, right? I could talk about this for hours. The bottom line is this.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I can do it in 3 minutes. Here we go. The bottom line is this. Talk about that ahead of time and establish expectations, right? Just say, hey, is this a game where you're good with lethality, right? Are you good with that level of dark consequence? Or do you want to be heroes who can actually, like, survive the insurmountable thing and, like, somehow walk away bruised but alive, right? The question I always ask myself when writing a game is, will character death in this moment or in this story actually add something to it, right? My Twitter response to this for a lot of people is I'm a huge fan of my players. I always want them to succeed, but F around and find out rules are always on, right? So it depends on if you want to show those consequences. It depends on the kind of game you want. But bottom line is if you talk to your players, get a feel for what they're looking for, right? And that's going to help really narrow in how you can respond at that point. Does that answer your question, or is there? Yeah. Okay, cool. I got 2 minutes left.
Well,
No.
it all comes down to style. Like,
Yep.
it depends on the type of game. Like Andy was talking about, Call of Cthulhu, something like that. Death is always on the table. You make sure they know that from the beginning. In a system like D&D or something like that, I'll usually stop and say something like, "Are you okay with this? Like, your character might die. Are you okay with that?" And sometimes that means you take a break from the game and you step into the other room and you talk about it. Sometimes they're just like, yeah, go for it. Sometimes they're like, no. But if you reach a point where the character is going to die, you can make it epic. You can make it heartbreaking. You can make it sad. The number one reason why people don't want their characters to die, I think, is because it's such a letdown. You spend such a long time with this character and you build them and you go on these adventures and they do amazing things and amazing feats because nobody wants to play regular people. You want to play a hero or a villain or an extreme of some kind. And so when it comes time for them to die, you can give it the gravity that it deserves. Nothing drives me up the wall faster than, like roll D20, roll the damage, look at it. Okay, your character's dead. Let's move on in the initiative order. If it happens, it's serious. It should be treated as something serious.
Absolutely.
We have a minute.
What's it? I think we have time for one more question. Anybody have?
Ooh, we got two. Huh?
2 questions.
We'll do both.
Yeah, back
Sure.
right?
Yep.
Back right?
Last.
Okay.
Yep.
On the topic of NPCs and creating them, do you have any experience or thoughts with sort of letting the players write the NPC stories and then give the NPCs what they think of them and build them and
Hell yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good
A lot of pretty much every game I run, I will ask players to give me a list of the people who are important to them. Even if it's just a 1-sentence description of like who it is. Do you have parents? Do you have friends? Do you have a lover? A pet? Like whatever. And it, depending on the game, it gives you storytelling fodder. It gives you a tool to make the circumstances seem more serious. The caveat to that is is with the safety tools that we talked about at the beginning, you have to make sure that they're okay with something happening to those NPCs.
Yep.
But it gives you a really powerful tool, and it helps you flesh out the world, and it helps them be more invested. Absolutely.
Walking them through a day in their life is a huge way to generate those NPCs because they're going to interact with parents, friends, coworkers, relationships, whoever. And that's a great way to just say, who are the people that are important to you? And then get that list from them in a good organic way.
Yeah, last question?
That's what. Yeah, you sure the back.
How do you decide when to bend or break the rules in order to make something more engaging or interesting, and when you kind of have to like draw yourself a line that no, even if it's good for the story, like rules are rules, I kind of have to stick to it.
Ooh, man.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
Well, so me personally.
Good question.
And yeah, this is not to say that this is what you must do. Me personally, in that fight between when do I bend or break the rules to make things more interesting, or when do I feel that I must stick to rules as written, I basically always go for the former. I can maybe think of an edge case where I went with the latter, but at least my philosophy, I am a benevolent despot at the table, and this extends even to the very fabric of the universe, the text of the rules themselves.
I'm the opposite extreme. I do it a lot. Honestly, if there's a moment where something would happen to a character where they wouldn't succeed, there's been a really cool build of tension. Everything comes down to one final swing. They roll. It's a 14. I look down. Their armor class is a 16 of the guy they're trying to hit. Yeah, great. Yep, that's it exactly. You hit it. Good job. And then they get the blow. But I'm a very story first GM. And that's just sort of my style. There's something to be said for both. Honestly, I tend to think Brendan's way is better, and it's something that I'm working on, but I think there's a moment and a case to be made for both of those circumstances.
And also, no, that being said, I think, in the case of are you going to have something, like where it says it should fail, but it feels like in the story that it shouldn't fail. Sometimes failure is the more interesting outcome.
Yeah.
So it's definitely kind of a more art than science, I would say.
Yeah, if I may. So, I kind of live between these two philosophies. Rules are a common operating picture, so everyone can sit down and understand how we're going to interact at the table and what do when we roll dice, right? That's super important because if I expect certain things to occur, then they should occur when they happen and vice versa, right? And it's also just the agreement of everyone playing the same game.
Yeah.
That said,
You're not done.
That said, dramatic pause.
Yeah.
Right? There are times when I'm very comfortable breaking rules for good dramatic story reasons. It comes down to what you're comfortable with, right? And usually when I break a rule, I will tell someone, this is raw. However, we're going to do this, right? Because in this moment, it seems very dramatic and cool. And you can make it a one-time instance so they don't think, okay, we're going to do this repetitively.
All right.
But
yep, we are
cool.
out of time.
Yep.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
You guys have been a great audience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for making our first ever panel so enjoyable.
First ever panel. Once again, thank you so much. We are Live from the Apocalypse. You can follow us on twitch.tv/Live from the Apocalypse. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram. We have 5 ongoing games with about 17 cast members. We are currently raising money for Planned Parenthood and an ocean conservation group called the Surfrider Foundation. They're excellent causes. You can find the donation links all over all of our stuff. And thank you again.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll be around. If you want to talk to us,
We'll
we'll
be hanging out, so if you have any more questions.
Oh, yeah, if you want to join the Discord, there's a lot of great people in there. Feel free, no pressure.
So, thank you.